Kick-Ass 2 is about how we, as a society, will process the almost fantastical nature of men, women, and in this case, high schoolers putting on masks and going on into the night to fight crime. To put it some more simply, it still has a lot of the tropes of a superhero story, but also provides real-life ramifications to them. And this is part of a fascinating phenomenon, where superhero stories are being reimagined or even placed in more realistic settings to ask what superheroes are fundamentally about. Superheroes, since their inception, have always been an overt representation of what humanity can achieve, whether that becoming the perfect fighter or being the kindest man on Earth. They are larger than life. They are more archetypal ideas than actual people. So I find it kind of fascinating that as a culture, we've become captivated by putting what is otherwise unrealistic and grounded icons in grim and grounded stories. However, the main goal of grounded such icons and stories is to deconstruct what superheroes are in general. They essentially interrogate this concept on a fundamental level, which not only comments on how insane one would have to be to put on the type and go out into the streets to fight crime, but more importantly criticizes our cultural obsession with the myth of the superhero. David Wazowski is a fascinating protagonist, especially when compared to his movie counterpart, as well as Miller's other superhero works. For starters, Dave commits some very needless acts of violence that draw him more in line with characters like the Punisher, rather than his much more likable movie counterpart. This is most telling while he's interrogating a mafia member and he learns that the mob's bookie is upstairs. Dave goes to take care of it, but the mob boss pleads, "No, my little brother's on the till. Go easy on him, man. He's a college kid." Once Dave finds his little brother, the kid begs, "Please, I don't have any weapons." But his classmate next to him only replies with, "Even better." And they proceed to beat him up like an inner thug. Miller actively presents Dave's actions as bad and unjustifiable, which I like to suggest is because Dave is incapable of seeing situations above a black and white mentality. He's unable to see people in his life as a complex human beings, where his perspective is so filtered with a traditional comic book lens. If you're associated with a mob, you're the enemy, and hence deserve to be given to a pulp. This all changes, however, at the end of the book, where Dave pushes Chris off a building and presumably kills him. In a more traditional comic, the focus would be on Dave's victory, and would act as the story's happy ending. The villain's dead after all. However, we instead see Dave listen to Chris's final words. "I'm pretty messed up, man. I don't know if it's as bad as it looks. Could you call me an ambulance? It just really hurts and I need to go to the hospital. I can't feel my legs, and I'm so scared." This scene is odd, for it's so deeply humanizing to what is an obvious caricature. The feeling that you get looking at John Romita Jr.'s art of Chris's mangled body can only be described as haunting, and makes it really hard to not empathize or at least pity Chris in some way. Many have said that this moment came out of nowhere, that it doesn't fit Chris's character with his parody-like feats of evil. But I believe that was Mark's point all along. This sparse moment of humanity from Chris is what really allows Dave to see how ridiculous, complex, and mature the situation really is. And instead of triumphantly walking away like in any other comic, Dave generally takes in the fact that he has taken a human life, and breaks through his childish perspective to do the right thing and call an ambulance. Furthermore, I believe Chris also fits into the idea of executing the typical superhero tropes, but in a more realistic way. I think this image really sums up his character. What's supposed to be an iconic and badass line is offset by the awkward image of a geeky high schooler hunched over his computer. In the film, the line is meant to be cool and intimidating, but in the comic, it's meant to be a subversion of that trope. This literary method can be seen all throughout Kick-Ass 2. For example, Mark Millar uses the kick the dog trope to make Valdez so evil to the point of parody. He even goes so far as to clichély kill Dave's father, and
So, I do find it fascinating that Millar makes Chris this spooflessly evil to the point where he's not really a believable person anymore, but then chooses to give him this very vulnerable and profoundly personal scene, which, like Dave's arc, shatters that traditional mustache-twirling villain perspective that one would find in a classic campy comic book. Finally, there's one trope on the very last page, which is
where you can pinpoint the book at its most satirical.
during the third act, a few side characters step aside from the bloody corners of the final battle. One character sarcastically says, "I half expected for the crowd to be cheering for us." At first, one may interpret this as a playful jab at the over-celebratorial nature of superhero story endings. However, ironically, this does happen. The crowd really does clap and cheer for the good guys. But of course, this is Mark Millar, so the crowd is enthusiastically cheering in protest of Hickle's arrest. Kick-Ass 2 is about a group of high schoolers who want to pursue their superhero fantasy. It's a lifestyle that is overly romanticized, but for obvious reasons there are very real and societal consequences for doing so. Kick-Ass is not only dissecting the mindset of someone who would put on a mask and fight crime, but also how our friends, family, and wider community would react to that.
It's a third deconstruction of the idea of the superhero.
And does so not through the mocking of the typical superhero tropes, but through the intuitive reimagining of them in a brutal, violent, and relentless setting.